The train whistle cut through the morning fog like a knife, signaling the final approach to the small town of Oakridge. Victoria Matthews pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the window, watching as dense forests gave way to scattered buildings. Her entire life was packed in the trunk beneath her seat. 3 dresses, a worn Bible her grandmother had given her, $47 in carefully counted bills, and a bundle of letters tied with blue ribbon. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The letters had been exchanged over 6 months. Each one read so many times that the paper had grown thin at the creases. Victoria didn't need to unfold them anymore. She had memorized every word. The final letter, the one that had sealed her. Fate lay open on her lap. Dear Miss Matthews, I am pleased to accept your application as my bride. My farm sits on 80 acres of good land with a sturdy 2-story house. I am 38 years old, in good health, and can provide a comfortable life for a suitable wife. I have enclosed train fare and will meet you at the Oakridge station on September 3rd at 4:15 p.m. Look for a man in a brown hat. Respectfully, Jonathan Miller. Victoria was 32, unmarried, and facing the harsh reality that in Boston, her prospects had dwindled to nothing. After her parents' deaths, the family savings had been depleted by medical bills, forcing her to sell their modest home. She had spent years teaching at a girls' school, but when the institution closed due to financial difficulties, she found herself without employment or prospects. The advertisement in the newspaper had seemed like Providence. Established farmer. Seeks educated, respectable woman for marriage. Must be willing to relocate to Oregon Territory. Victoria had answered, including a daguerreotype that showed her serious expression and straight posture, her dark hair pulled back in a practical style that emphasized her high cheekbones and clear gray eyes. The other passengers in the car paid little attention to Victoria as the train slowed. A salesman with a handlebar mustache gathered his samples. 2 elderly sisters whispered to each other behind lace-gloved hands, and a young mother tried to quiet her fussing infant. Victoria smoothed her best traveling dress, navy blue wool that had been carefully altered to follow current fashion, and pinned her hat more securely. The station at Oakridge was little more than a wooden platform with a small building that served as both ticket, office, and telegraph station. As Victoria descended from the train, she scanned the few people waiting on the platform. There was no man in a brown hat. No one stepped forward to claim her. She stood uncertainly beside her trunk as the train belched steam and continued its journey westward. The platform gradually emptied as the other passengers were greeted by waiting family members or made their way toward the town's single street. Victoria checked her pocket watch. It was 4:25 p.m. "Excuse me," she finally approached the station master, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose. "I'm looking for Mr. Jonathan Miller. He was supposed to meet me here at 4:15. The station master's expression changed immediately, a look of discomfort passing over his features. "You must be the mail-order bride," he said quietly. "I am Miss Victoria Matthews, yes. I've come to marry Mr. Miller." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Miss Matthews, I'm afraid I have some unfortunate news." The station master removed his spectacles, polishing them nervously on his vest. "Jonathan Miller passed away 3 weeks ago. Pneumonia took him fast. He was gone before the doctor from Millerville could even arrive." Victoria felt the blood drain from her face. "Dead?" she whispered. "But I've come all this way. We were to be married. I've sold everything I owned." "I'm mighty sorry, miss. It was unexpected." Miller was a strong man, never sick a day in his life from what folks said. "What am I to do now?" The reality of her situation crashed down upon her. She was alone in an unfamiliar town, thousands of miles from anything she knew, with limited funds and nowhere to go. There's a boarding house run by Mrs. Peterson that might take you in for a few nights while you figure things out, the station master suggested, clearly uncomfortable with her distress. Though I should mention she generally requires payment in advance. Victoria nodded numbly, trying to gather her thoughts. And Mr. Miller's property? What's become of it? The bank will claim it eventually, I suppose. Miller didn't have family that anyone knew of. The place is sitting empty at the moment. The station master hesitated. It's about 5 miles north of town. Not much to look at, but it's got solid walls and a roof. A desperate plan began to form in Victoria's mind. Would it be considered trespassing if I were to stay there temporarily? After all, I was to be his wife. The station master considered this. Well, technically, I suppose it would be. But practically speaking, no. One's checking on the property, and the bank won't start proceedings until after harvest at the earliest. Winter's coming soon, and an empty house doesn't do anyone any good. By the time darkness fell, Victoria found herself sitting alone in Jonathan Miller's kitchen. The station master's son had driven her to the property in his wagon, unloaded her trunk, and departed with the tip of his hat and a concerned glance that suggested he doubted the wisdom of leaving a city woman alone in an isolated farmhouse. The house was simple but solid, a main floor with a kitchen, sitting room, and small bedroom, and a second floor that Victoria had yet to explore. A layer of dust covered everything, but otherwise the place was neat and showed signs of careful maintenance. A stack of firewood stood ready beside the stone fireplace, and the pantry contained basic provisions: flour, sugar, coffee, and some preserved vegetables in glass jars. Victoria lit a lamp and continued her exploration. Jonathan Miller had lived simply but not poorly. His furniture was handmade but crafted with care. Bookshelves held a surprising number of volumes: history, agriculture, and even some poetry. This was a man who valued knowledge, who might have been a good match for a former teacher. As she climbed the narrow staircase to investigate the upper floor, Victoria noticed something odd. There were far more beds than made sense for a single man. The largest bedroom contained a double bed that would have been theirs had Jonathan lived, but the second bedroom held 4 small beds, arranged dormitory style. A third, smaller room contained 2 more beds. Why would a man living alone need 6 extra beds? Victoria murmured to herself. She was moving toward the final door at the end of the hallway when she heard it, a faint sound that might have been a cough or a whisper. Victoria froze, her heart pounding. She was certain she'd been told Jonathan Miller lived alone, yet there was definitely movement coming from behind that door. "Hello," she called, her voice barely audible. "Is someone there?" Silence answered her, but it was a tense waiting kind of silence. Victoria gathered her courage and stepped forward, turning the doorknob slowly. The door opened to reveal a steep staircase leading down, presumably to a cellar. Complete darkness greeted her, but she was certain she could hear breathing now. Multiple sources of breathing. "I know someone's down there," she said, louder this time. "I'm not here to harm anyone. My name is Victoria Matthews. I was supposed to marry Jonathan Miller, but I've just learned he's passed away." After a moment of silence, a small voice responded from the darkness. "Is Pa really dead?" Victoria felt her breath catch. "Yes, I'm afraid so. Who are you?" A match flared in the darkness, illuminating the face of a boy perhaps 12 or 13 years old. Behind him, partially visible in the weak light, were other faces, younger children, their expressions fearful and suspicious. "I'm William," the boy said. "These are my brothers and sisters." As Victoria descended the steps into the cellar, the match flame revealed a scene that stopped her heart. 8 children, ranging from perhaps 4 to 13 years old, were huddled in a crude living space that had been established in the root cellar. Thin pallets lined the floor, a few candle Stubs were carefully arranged on upturned crates, and a bucket of water sat in the corner. Their clothes were dirty but had been mended multiple times, and their faces showed the gaunt look of those who hadn't eaten properly in some time. "How long have you been down here?" Victoria asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Since Pa got sick," William answered. "He told us to hide if anything happened to him. Said people would come and separate us, send us to different orphanages or to work as servants. We've been waiting for him to come back." 3 weeks, whispered a girl who appeared to be the second oldest. "We've been down here 3 weeks. Only going out at night to get vegetables from the garden and water from the well." Victoria's mind raced. Jonathan Miller had never mentioned children in his letters. Not once had he indicated he was a widower with 8 children. Why had he concealed such a crucial fact? And more importantly, what was she to do now? "I'm Elizabeth," the second oldest girl said. "That's William you met. Then there's James and Henry, they're twins, and they're 10. Sarah is 8, Thomas is 7, Margaret is 6, and little Grace is 4. 8 children had been hiding in fear. They were slowly starving rather than risk being split up. Their father had looked for a mail-order bride without telling her about them. Now they looked at Victoria with fear, suspicion, and hope. "Are you hungry?" Victoria asked, though she could see the answer on their thin faces. They all nodded. "Then let's go upstairs. I'll make you something to eat, and you can tell me everything." In the kitchen, Victoria worked fast. She made a simple meal from what was in the pantry, cornbread and beans with a bit of salt pork. The children watched her every move. Their eyes followed the food with an intensity that broke her heart. When she put the food in front of them, they waited, looking at William for permission. "Go ahead," he nodded, and they started eating. They tried to eat slowly despite their hunger. As they ate, they told their story bit by bit. Their mother had died giving birth to Grace 4 years ago. Jonathan had tried his best to care for them alone, but it was hard. The older children had taken on grown-up jobs, William working in the fields with his father, Elizabeth running the house and caring for the younger ones. "Pa said he needed help," William explained. "He said he was going to find us a new mother. He showed us your letters and your picture. He said you were a teacher and would be good for us. But he never told me about you," Victoria said gently. "Why would he keep you a secret?" Elizabeth looked at William. "He was afraid you wouldn't come if you knew there were so many of us. He said city ladies don't want ready-made families, especially big ones." Victoria felt many emotions at once: anger at Jonathan's lies, sympathy for his desperate situation, and worry for these children who had been hiding in fear. "When Pa got sick, he made us promise to hide if something happened to him," William continued. "He said the authorities would split us up for sure. He told us to wait for you, but if you didn't come, we should take what we could carry and try to reach our uncle in California." "You were going to walk to California?" Victoria asked, shocked. "We were giving you until the first snow," William said simply. "Then we have to leave before the mountain passes got blocked." Victoria looked at the 8 faces watching her so intently. In Boston, she had been alone, with no purpose or connection. Here, in this remote farmhouse, were 8 children who needed exactly what she could give: education, care, and the strength of a woman with nothing left to lose. "I think," she said slowly, "that we have a lot to talk about. But first, I think baths are needed, and then proper beds for everyone. Tomorrow, we'll figure out what happens next." That night, as 8 children slept in clean nightclothes in proper beds for the first time in weeks, Victoria sat at Jonathan Miller's desk and thought about their situation. Her money wouldn't last long with 9 mouths to feed. The farm would provide some food, but winter was coming, and she knew nothing about farming. The town thought Jonathan Miller had lived alone. Telling people about the children would raise questions she couldn't easily answer. More importantly, without legal claim to the children or the property, Authorities would almost certainly separate the siblings and sell the farm to pay any debts. Jonathan Miller's lies had created an impossible situation, but his children shouldn't suffer for their father's mistakes. By morning, Victoria had made her decision. When the children gathered in the kitchen, clearly expecting her to say she was leaving, she instead explained her plan. As far as the town knows, Jonathan Miller lived alone. They don't know about you, and for now, I think it should stay that way. She looked at each serious face. I was meant to be Jonathan Miller's wife. Instead, I will be your mother, and we will make this work together. William and Elizabeth have been managing for years, and I have skills to offer. Together, we'll keep this family together. But what about the authorities? William asked. What about the bank? For now, I'll tell anyone who asks that I'm Jonathan's widow. We were married by mail before I traveled here. It sometimes happens that way. The property is mine by marriage, and you are my stepchildren, newly arrived from staying with relatives back east. You'd lie for us? Elizabeth asked in a small voice. I would protect you, Victoria corrected gently. Sometimes protection requires hard choices. But this is only until I can find a legal way to adopt you properly and secure our claim to the farm. The plan would be challenging. They would need to create a consistent story, teach the younger children what to say if questioned, and make sure their public behavior didn't raise suspicions. Victoria would need to learn farming quickly, with only the children's knowledge to guide her. They would need to stretch their small resources through the winter until spring planting. But, looking at these 8 children who had already lost so much, Victoria knew with certainty that she had found her purpose. She had traveled west seeking security through marriage to a stranger. Instead, she had found a family that needed her as desperately as she needed them. Are we agreed then? She asked. Will you accept me as your mother, not by birth or even by marriage to your father, but by choice and commitment? 8 heads nodded solemnly. Then let's begin, Victoria said, standing up. We have a farm to run and a family to build. As morning sunlight came through the dusty windows, lighting up the circle of solemn faces, Victoria felt something she hadn't felt in years, a sense of belonging, of being exactly where she was meant to be. The path ahead would be hard, with challenges she could barely imagine. But for the first time since hearing of Jonathan Miller's death, Victoria felt hope growing in her heart. These children needed her. And perhaps just as much, she needed them. And we'll say he wanted to prepare a proper home with a mother before bringing you here. The older children nodded, understanding the necessity of the deception, while the younger ones looked confused but willing to follow their siblings' lead. We'll need supplies from town, Victoria continued. But we can't all go at once. That would draw too much attention. William and I will go today to establish our story, while the rest of you continue work here. The ride to town was tense, with Victoria constantly rehearsing their fabricated history in her mind. William sat beside her on the wagon bench, his small shoulders squared with determination. Remember, Victoria said as they approached Oakridge, from now on, I'm your stepmother. We were married by correspondence before I traveled west. Yes, ma'am, William nodded, then hesitated. What should we call you? Victoria hadn't considered this. I suppose mother would be most natural for our story, but I don't want to replace your real mother in your hearts. William was quiet for a moment. Ma died when Grace was born. I remember her, but the little ones don't. I think she'd want someone to be mother to us now. Touched by his maturity, Victoria reached over to squeeze his hand. Then mother it is, at least in public. In private, you can call me Victoria until we're more comfortable with each other. The general store in Oakridge was run by a portly man named Harold Jenkins, whose curious eyes followed Victoria and William as they entered. Word of the mail-order bride's arrival had clearly spread through the small community. Mrs. Miller, I presume? Jenkins called out. Heard about your situation, Terrible shame about Jonathan. Victoria summoned her most composed expression. Yes, it was quite a shock to arrive and find my intended had passed. Even more so for William and his siblings, who had just arrived from staying with relatives in the East. Jenkins's eyebrows shot up. Siblings? Jonathan never mentioned having children. My father was a private man, William said, exactly as they had rehearsed. He wanted to make sure he had a proper home with a mother before bringing us west. Jenkins studied them both, suspicion evident in his gaze. How many children are we talking about? 8 in total, Victoria replied calmly, though her heart raced. 7 besides William here. Their mother passed some years ago. The storekeeper whistled low. 8 young ones and a farm to run? That's a mighty heavy burden for a new widow who never even got to be a proper wife. We're managing, Victoria said with dignity. In fact, we've come for supplies. The children need proper clothes for winter, and our pantry needs restocking. As Jenkins filled their order, other townspeople drifted into the store, each finding some excuse to introduce themselves to the widow and her stepson. Victoria maintained her composure, repeating their story with consistent details, allowing an appropriate degree of grief to color her words when speaking of Jonathan. A stern-looking woman in a high-necked black dress introduced herself as Mrs. Holbrook, the minister's wife. We were all quite surprised to learn Jonathan Miller had children, she said, her tone making it clear she found the situation suspicious. He attended church regularly, but never once mentioned family. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My husband was a man who kept his private affairs private, Victoria replied. The children have been with relatives in Massachusetts following their mother's passing. Jonathan wanted to establish a secure home with a new wife before bringing them west. Mrs. Holbrook's eyes narrowed. And you say you were married? By correspondence, yes. It's not uncommon for those of us who come west as brides. Victoria met the woman's gaze steadily. We had planned a proper church ceremony upon my arrival. But God had other plans. The mention of God seemed to temper Mrs. Holbrook's suspicion slightly. The church takes care of its own, she said. You must bring the children to Sunday services. I'm sure the congregation will want to help in any way they can. Victoria recognized both the opportunity and the danger in this offer. Assistance would be welcome, but greater scrutiny would make maintaining their deception more difficult. That's very kind, she replied. We'll certainly attend when we're more settled. By the time they loaded their supplies and headed back to the farm, Victoria was exhausted from the constant vigilance required to maintain their story. Every question had felt like a trap, every curious glance a threat to the fragile security she was trying to build for these children. You did well, she told William as they left town behind. You're a natural actor. I just told the truth. About Pa, he said. He was private. He didn't talk much to strangers. Victoria glanced at the boy. What was he like? Your father? He and I exchanged letters, but I realize now I knew very little about him. William considered this. He was strict but fair. Worked from sunrise to sunset. Didn't complain, even when things were hard. After May died, he did his best, but the boy's voice faltered. He wasn't good at the gentle things. That's why he wanted to find us a mother. Back at the farm, they found the other children had been busy in their absence. Elizabeth had organized a thorough cleaning of the house. The twins had repaired a broken step on the porch, and even the youngest had contributed by sorting potatoes in the root cellar. Their eager faces as they helped unload supplies reminded Victoria of just how young they truly were, despite their responsibilities. That evening, after the younger children were in bed, Victoria sat at the kitchen table with William and Elizabeth to discuss their situation more honestly. The town is suspicious, she admitted. We'll need to be very careful. What happens if they discover the truth? Elizabeth asked, her voice small. Victoria didn't want to frighten them, but they deserved honesty. If authorities learn that I have no legal right to you or this property, you would likely be separated and sent to orphanages or work placements. The farm would be sold to cover any debts your father might have had. William's expression hardened. That's why Pa told us to hide if anything happened to him. He knew they'd split us up. I won't let that happen, Victoria promised. But I need to find a way to legally become your guardian and secure our claim to this land. How? Elizabeth asked. Victoria shook her head. I don't know yet, but there must be a way, and I'll find it. Until then, we need to work this farm and convince everyone that we belong here. The days settled into a rhythm of hard work and careful planning. Victoria learned farming tasks by day and studied Jonathan's agricultural books by night. The children proved to be patient teachers, showing her how to preserve vegetables for winter, repair worn clothing, and manage the countless tasks that kept a farm functioning. William took charge of the heavier outdoor work, with the twins James and Henry helping as much as their 10-year-old frames allowed. Elizabeth managed the household with remarkable efficiency, teaching Victoria how to bake bread in the temperamental wood stove and make soap from lye and fat. 8-year-old Sarah revealed a gift for nurturing the younger children, while 7-year-old Thomas showed surprising skill with the animals. Even 6-year-old Margaret and 4-year-old Grace contributed according to their abilities, sorting beans or fetching tools. Their first major challenge came 3 weeks after Victoria's arrival, when Sheriff Daniel Cooper appeared at their door unannounced. A tall man with graying hair and watchful eyes, he dismounted from his horse and approached the house with the measured steps of someone who preferred to observe before acting. Victoria wiped flour from her hands and stepped onto the porch, her heart pounding but her expression composed. Good afternoon, Sheriff. What brings you to our farm? Mrs. Miller, he nodded, removing his hat. Just making my rounds, checking on outlying properties before winter sets in. His gaze moved past her to where the children were visible through the open door, engaged in various tasks. I understand Jonathan had quite a few children no one knew about. 8 in total, Victoria confirmed, sticking to their established story. They arrived from relatives in the East, unfortunately just after their father passed. Cooper studied her face. Convenient timing. I wouldn't call any of this convenient, Sheriff, Victoria replied with a touch of sharpness. I arrived, expecting to start a new life with my husband, only to find him gone and 8 children depending on me. The sheriff had the grace to look slightly abashed. No offense intended, ma'am. It's just unusual, is all. These are unusual circumstances, Victoria agreed, softening her tone. Would you care to come in for coffee? It's a long ride back to town. Inside, Cooper's keen eyes took in everything, the clean but worn furnishings, the children's wary expressions, the evidence of their industry. Victoria maintained casual conversation while Elizabeth served coffee and William reported on the state of their livestock, as any responsible farmer's son would do. Do you have your marriage certificate? Cooper asked suddenly, setting down his cup. Victoria had anticipated this question. Unfortunately, no. Our marriage was arranged by correspondence. We had planned a proper ceremony here, but she allowed her voice to trail off, suggesting emotion too powerful to express. And the children's papers? Birth certificates? Packed away in trunks that haven't arrived yet, Victoria lied smoothly. The freight company promised delivery before the first snow. Cooper nodded slowly, clearly not entirely convinced, without obvious cause for further inquiry. Well, Mrs. Miller, running a farm alone is difficult enough without 8 young ones to care for. If you find yourself overwhelmed, the town council might be able to arrange assistance. The implied threat was clear. If she couldn't manage, the authorities would step in. Victoria forced a grateful smile. "That's very kind, but we're managing well enough. The children are extraordinarily capable." After the sheriff departed, Victoria gathered the family in the kitchen. "He's suspicious," she said bluntly. "We need to be more prepared. Starting tomorrow, we'll practice our story in greater detail. Where you lived in Massachusetts, your journey west, everything about your father that a child would naturally know. What if he comes back with more questions?" James asked, his face worried. "Then we'll have better answers," Victoria replied firmly. "And we'll be more vigilant about watching for visitors. No one comes up the road without us knowing in advance." That night, unable to sleep, Victoria sat at Jonathan's desk examining his papers by lamplight. Most were related to the farm. Seed purchases, equipment repairs, weather records meticulously kept over years. Nothing about the children, which supported their claim that he was intensely private. But also nothing that could help secure her position as their guardian. As the lamp oil burned low, Victoria finally found something useful: Jonathan's deed to the property, filed and official, free of liens or mortgages. The farm was fully his, which meant it would pass to his heirs, the children, rather than reverting to the bank. If she could somehow establish herself as their legal guardian and manager of the estate, their position would be more secure. The sheriff's visit had made one thing clear: time was running out. Sooner or later, someone would demand proof she couldn't provide, and their fragile security would collapse. Victoria needed a more permanent solution, and she needed it before. Winter isolated them from both help and threat. An idea began to form, desperate and perhaps foolish, but possibly their only chance. If she could find someone with legal authority who would sympathize with their situation, someone who could help create the documentation they needed. Victoria recalled Mrs. Holbrook's invitation to attend church. The minister would have certain legal powers, the authority to perform marriages, witness documents, perhaps even formalize guardianship under frontier conditions. And the church community might provide the social acceptance they needed to reinforce their story. It was a risk. Greater exposure meant greater scrutiny. But continuing in isolation was equally dangerous. Victoria made her decision. On Sunday, they would attend services at Oakridge Church, dressed in their best clothes, prepared to face the community's judgment while seeking its protection. She wrote a letter by lamplight, addressing it to Judge Emmett Richardson in the county seat, a 3-day ride away. She had noticed his name on several official documents in Jonathan's papers, and hoped he might be sympathetic to their plight. In careful language, she explained her arrival as Jonathan Miller's intended bride, his unexpected death, and her commitment to the children left in her care. Victoria did not directly lie in the letter, but she allowed certain assumptions to stand unchallenged. She requested information about formalizing her guardianship of the children and securing the property for their benefit. It was a calculated risk. The judge might investigate further, but they needed allies with legal authority. As dawn broke, Victoria sealed the letter and tucked it away to be posted when they next went to town. She had no idea if this gamble would secure their future or hasten their discovery, but standing still was no longer an option. These children had become her responsibility, her family by choice, if not by law, and she would fight with every resource at her disposal to keep them together and safe. Looking out the window at the farm coming to life in the early light, William heading to the barn, Elizabeth lighting the kitchen stove, the younger children still sleeping peacefully upstairs, Victoria felt a fierce determination unlike anything she'd experienced before. She had come west seeking security through marriage, but had found something far more valuable: purpose. "We'll find a way," she whispered to herself. "Whatever it takes, we'll find a way." The church in Oakridge stood at the far end of the town's single street, a white clapboard building with a modest steeple that had begun to lean slightly after years of prairie winds. Victoria guided the wagon toward it, 8 children dressed in their best clothes seated behind her like a row of nervous birds. They had spent days preparing for this moment, rehearsing their story, mending clothes to present a respectable appearance, and discussing how to behave under the town's scrutiny. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Remember, Victoria said quietly as they approached, you've been in Massachusetts with relatives. You arrived just after your father passed. We don't need to volunteer information, but we must be consistent with what we've already told people. As they pulled up to the hitching post, Victoria could see townsfolk already gathering, their curious glances making no pretense of discretion. The Miller children, once hidden in a cellar, their very existence a secret, were now the focus of the entire community's attention. "Chins up," Victoria murmured as she helped little Grace down from the wagon. "We belong here as much as anyone." Mrs. Holbrook, the minister's wife, approached immediately. Her stern expression softened slightly at the sight of the children lined up in age order, freshly scrubbed and solemn. "Mrs. Miller, we're pleased you could join us today. These must be Jonathan's children." "Yes," Victoria replied, placing a protective hand on William's shoulder. "This is William, my eldest. Then Elizabeth, James, and Henry, their twins. Sarah, Thomas, Margaret, and little Grace." "Such well-behaved children," Mrs. Holbrook observed, though her eyes held calculation rather than warmth. "It's remarkable how composed they are, having lost their father so recently." "They're remarkably resilient," Victoria said, meeting the woman's gaze steadily. "Children often are, when given proper guidance and love." The church interior was simple but dignified, with wooden pews facing a plain altar. Victoria led her family to a seat near the back, hoping to minimize attention, but their entrance had already caused a ripple of whispers to spread through the congregation. 8 children where none had been known to exist before. It was the most exciting development Oakridge had seen in years. Reverend Holbrook was a tall, thin man with kind eyes that contrasted with his wife's sharp gaze. His sermon focused on community and mutual support, with pointed references to caring for widows and orphans that seemed directed specifically at the Millers. Victoria maintained a composed expression throughout, though she could feel the weight of dozens of stares boring into her back. After the service, the congregation gathered outside for the social ritual that was as much a part of Sunday worship as the sermon itself. Victoria steeled herself for the interrogation disguised as hospitality that was sure to follow. "Mrs. Miller," the Reverend greeted her, "I'm so pleased you've brought the children today. I knew Jonathan as a devoted parishioner, though he rarely spoke of personal matters." "My husband was a private man," Victoria replied, the practiced explanation coming easily now. "But he cared deeply for his children, which is why he sought a mother for them after so many years alone." "And you were willing to take on such a responsibility, sight unseen?" This came from a sharp-featured woman Victoria hadn't met before. 8 children is a considerable burden for any woman, let alone one who expected to be a new bride. Victoria lifted her chin slightly. "I came west seeking purpose, Mrs. Whitfield, Martha Whitfield. Mrs. Whitfield. I found that purpose, though not in the way I expected. These children need me, and I need them. It's as simple as that." Something in Victoria's tone must have resonated with the women present, because several nodded in understanding. The conversation shifted to more practical matters: the approaching winter, preparations for Harvest Festival, the school that met 3 days a week in a room attached to the church. "Your older children should attend," suggested the schoolteacher. Miss Abigail Lawrence, a young woman with intelligent eyes and a determined set to her jaw. "Education is precious on the frontier," Victoria hesitated. Sending the children to school would integrate them into the community, providing additional protection through social acceptance. But it would also subject them to closer scrutiny and separation from her guidance. "Perhaps after harvest," she said diplomatically. "We have much work to do before winter, and I've been continuing their education at home. I was a teacher in Boston, you see. This revelation sparked genuine interest. Teachers were scarce in frontier communities, and Victoria suddenly found herself receiving more welcoming attention than suspicious scrutiny. We've been trying to establish a proper school, Reverend Holbrook explained. Miss Lawrence does her best, but she has nearly 30 children of all ages with vastly different levels of education. It's nearly impossible to give each child the attention they deserve, Miss Lawrence admitted. Especially the older boys, who should be learning advanced mathematics and sciences to prepare them for potential professions. Victoria recognized an opportunity forming. Perhaps I could assist in some capacity, she suggested carefully, once we're more settled at the farm. By the time they prepared to depart, Victoria had managed to establish connections with several key community members without revealing anything that might compromise their precarious situation. More importantly, she had secured an introduction to Judge Richardson, who would be visiting Oakridge the following month for circuit court sessions. The judge is a fair-minded man, Reverend Holbrook assured her. If you have questions about formalizing your guardianship of the children, he would be the one to ask. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As they drove home, the children's rigid posture gradually relaxed, like puppets whose strings had been cut. Did we do all right? Elizabeth asked anxiously. You were perfect, Victoria assured them. Every one of you. You conducted yourselves with dignity and composure. Miss Lawrence asked me about our school in Massachusetts, William said worriedly. I didn't know what to say, so I just told her we studied McGuffey's Readers like everyone else. That was quick thinking, Victoria praised him. Simple answers are often best. We can't be tripped up on details we've never discussed. The farm looked particularly welcoming as they crested the final hill. The solid house with smoke curling from the chimney, the barn and outbuildings weathered but sturdy, the garden with its last vegetables ready for harvest. It wasn't grand or luxurious, but it was becoming home in a way Victoria had never expected. That evening, as the younger children played quieter Sunday games and the older ones helped with necessary chores, Victoria sat on the porch contemplating their progress. They had food stored for winter, the house was clean and functional, and they had begun establishing themselves in the community. But legal security still eluded them, and Victoria knew that until she secured proper guardianship, everything they had built remained vulnerable. A small sound made her turn. Elizabeth stood in the doorway, watching her with serious eyes. May I join you? The girl asked. Of course. Victoria patted the bench beside her. Elizabeth sat, smoothing her skirt with careful hands. At 11, she carried herself with the gravity of someone much older, a child forced too early into adult responsibilities. I've been thinking, Elizabeth said after a moment, about what happens next. What do you mean? If the judge helps. U.S., if we get to stay together. What then? The girl looked up at Victoria, her expression questioning. Will you stay with us? Even if you don't have to? The question caught Victoria by surprise. In her determination to secure their immediate future, she hadn't fully considered the longer term. What would happen if she successfully established legal guardianship? Would she remain on this remote farm, raising 8 children who weren't hers by birth? Or would she, once they were secure, seek the easier life she had originally envisioned? Looking at Elizabeth's anxious face, Victoria realized the truth of her own heart. I will stay, she said firmly. Not from obligation, but because this is where I belong now, with all of you. Elizabeth's shoulders relaxed slightly. Some of the ladies at church looked at you like they felt sorry for you. Like being stuck with us was the worst thing that could happen. Victoria laughed softly. Then they understand nothing about what matters in life. I came west seeking security, yes, But what I've found here is purpose and connection. That's worth far more." The girl leaned against Victoria's shoulder, a rare gesture of physical affection. "I was so scared when Pa died," she whispered. "Not just about being separated, but about having to be the mother to everyone forever. I'm not ready for that." "No child should have to be," Victoria replied, putting an arm around her. "That's why I'm here now. You can just be Elizabeth, 11 years old, smart, capable, but still allowed to be a child." They sat in companionable silence as twilight deepened around them. From inside came the sounds of the younger children. Being herded toward bed, William's patient voice directing Thomas to wash his face properly, the twins arguing good-naturedly about whose turn it was to bring in more firewood. These ordinary domestic sounds filled Victoria with a profound sense of rightness. This unlikely family, formed through desperation and deception, had somehow become more real and meaningful than anything in her previous life. The weeks following, their church appearance brought subtle changes in how the town regarded the Miller family. Victoria's background as a teacher elevated her standing considerably, and her willingness to assist with the school once harvest was complete won approval from influential community members. Sheriff Cooper still watched them with suspicious eyes when they came to town, but his open hostility had subsided to wary observation. Harvest kept them busy from dawn until dusk. Victoria's city-bred hands developed calluses as she learned to gather crops, preserve food for winter, and assist with the 100 tasks necessary to prepare a farm for the coming cold. The children worked alongside her, their experienced hands guiding her through unfamiliar processes, their matter-of-fact acceptance of hard work both humbling and inspiring. William proudly took charge of bringing in the last hay, organizing his brothers into an efficient team despite their young age. Elizabeth proved to be a master at preserving vegetables, teaching Victoria the precise timing needed for perfect pickles and the exact texture that indicated properly canned tomatoes. Even little Grace contributed, her small fingers nimble at shelling dried beans for winter soups. Their first significant test came when Victoria arranged for William, Elizabeth, and the twins to attend school 2 days a week once the most pressing harvest work was complete. Miss Lawrence welcomed them warmly, but other children were less accepting, viewing the mysterious Miller children with suspicion and curiosity. "They keep asking questions about Massachusetts," James reported after their first day. "About our old house and school and friends. And William got in a fight," Henry added, "because Tommy Wilson said we were liars and Pay never had any children." Victoria looked at William's bruised knuckles with concern. "Fighting isn't the answer," she said gently. "Though I understand why you felt you had to defend us." "I didn't start it," William said stubbornly, "but I finished it. No one talks about our family that way." The phrase "our family" warmed Victoria's heart despite her worry. These children had accepted her as one of their own, just as she had embraced them. Whatever legal complications they faced, the emotional reality of their connection had become unquestionable. News of Judge Richardson's arrival in Oakridge spread through the community like wildfire. He would be holding court for 3 days, handling everything from property disputes to minor criminal matters. Victoria knew this might be their only chance to establish legal standing before winter isolated them from both help and scrutiny. She chose her moment carefully, approaching the judge after court proceedings on the second day. He was an imposing figure, tall and broad-shouldered despite his advancing years, with a full beard streaked with gray and penetrating blue eyes that seemed to evaluate everything they saw. "Judge Richardson," Victoria greeted him respectfully. "I'm Victoria Miller. I believe Reverend Holbrook mentioned I might speak with you about a legal matter." The judge studied her with interest. "Ah, yes. The mail-order bride who arrived to find her intended deceased and 8 previously unknown children in her care. Quite a remarkable situation." His direct acknowledgement of their unusual circumstances caught Victoria off guard. Yes, well, extraordinary times call for extraordinary measures, she managed. Richardson nodded toward a private corner of the church where court was being held. Perhaps we should discuss your situation more privately, Mrs. Miller. Once seated away from curious ears, Victoria explained her concerns, the lack of formal documentation for her guardianship of the children, the uncertain status of the property, and her fear that without legal protection, the family could be separated by well-meaning but rigid authorities. I understand Jonathan Miller owned his property outright, she concluded. The children are his rightful heirs, but they're too young to manage it themselves. I need legal standing to protect both them and their inheritance. Judge Richardson listened without interruption, his expression thoughtful. When she finished, he remained silent for several moments, his fingers steepled before him. Mrs. Miller, he said finally, frontier law allows certain accommodations for unusual circumstances. We don't have the luxury of strict adherence to procedures that might be standard back east. He paused, his gaze direct and evaluating. However, I'm concerned about several aspects of your story. Victoria's heart sank, but she maintained a composed expression. You arrived expecting to marry Jonathan Miller, only to find him deceased, the judge continued. You claim you were married by correspondence, yet have no documentation. You've taken responsibility for 8 children who apparently lived elsewhere until conveniently arriving just after their father's death, also without documentation. The circumstances are unusual, I acknowledge, Victoria said carefully. Indeed, Richardson studied her face. Sheriff Cooper has expressed concerns. He believes there's more to this situation than you've shared. Victoria felt cold fear spreading through her chest. This was the moment she had dreaded, direct confrontation by someone with the authority to destroy everything they had built. Judge Richardson, she said with quiet dignity, I came west seeking a new life. I found one, though not in the way I expected. Those children need me, and I need them. Whatever legal complications exist, the human reality is 8 vulnerable. Young people who deserve stability and care. And you're prepared to provide that? For children who aren't yours by birth or even by proper marriage to their father. I am, Victoria met his gaze without flinching. I was a teacher in Boston. I have skills to offer them beyond just keeping house. More importantly, I've grown to love them as if they were my own. I will fight to keep them safe and together. Richardson's expression softened slightly. Love is a powerful motivator, Mrs. Miller, but the law requires more tangible evidence. He leaned forward. If I were to rule on guardianship, I would need testimony from community members regarding your character and capability. I would need to speak with the children themselves. And I would need some documentation, any documentation, supporting your connection to this family. The children will speak for me, Victoria said confidently. As for community testimony, Reverend Holbrook, Miss Lawrence, and several others have observed our family over recent weeks. Regarding documentation, she hesitated. I have Jonathan's letters to me and the deed to his property. Beyond that, I can only offer my word and my commitment. The judge considered this. Return tomorrow with the children and whatever papers you have. I'll hear testimony from community members and make my determination before I leave Oakridge. As Victoria drove home, her mind raced with plans and contingencies. Everything would depend on tomorrow's hearing, their future, their safety, their ability to remain together as a family. If the judge ruled against them, they might have to flee, abandoning the farm and everything they had worked for. That evening, she gathered the children in the kitchen to explain the situation honestly. The judge will speak with each of you tomorrow, she told them. He's trying to determine if I should be your legal guardian. What do we say? William asked, his young face serious. Victoria took a deep breath. The truth, she said finally, or at least the emotional truth, that we belong together. That we're a family now, regardless of how it began. But what about? Elizabeth began, her expression worried. I'm not asking you to lie about the details of how we came together, Victoria clarified. If the judge asks directly about your father's death or where you were when it happened, you can answer truthfully. But focus on what matters most, that we've become a real family and need to stay together. That night, Victoria slept little, alternating between prayer and practical planning. If the judge ruled in their favor, they would have the legal protection they desperately needed. If not, they would have to decide whether to accept separation by legal authorities or flee together to start over elsewhere. By dawn, she had made her peace with either outcome. These children had become hers in every way that mattered. Whether the law recognized that bond or not, she would find a way to protect them. The farm, the community acceptance, even her reputation. All were secondary to keeping this unlikely family together. As they dressed in their best clothes once again and loaded into the wagon for the trip to town, Victoria looked at the 8 solemn faces watching her for reassurance. In just over a month, they had transformed from terrified children hiding in a cellar to members of a functioning family. Whatever happened in Judge Richardson's court today, that transformation was real and precious. Remember, she told them. As they approached Oakridge, no matter what happens today, we are a family. No court ruling can change that. William, sitting beside her on the wagon bench, reached over to squeeze her hand briefly. We know, he said simply, speaking for all of them. And so will the judge once he meets us. The makeshift courtroom in Oakridge's church was filled to capacity. Word had spread about the unusual hearing, and it seemed the entire town had turned out to witness the proceedings. Victoria sat with the children on a front bench, their faces solemn but composed. Sheriff Cooper occupied a prominent position near Judge Richardson, his skeptical expression making his opinion clear. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. This is an informal hearing regarding guardianship of the Miller children and management of the Miller estate, Judge Richardson announced, his authoritative voice silencing the murmurs. As circuit judge for this territory, I have the authority to make determinations in matters of guardianship when standard procedures cannot be followed due to frontier conditions. Victoria straightened her spine, drawing strength from the 8 children beside her. Whatever happened today, they would face it together. Mrs. Victoria Miller, the judge continued, you are petitioning for legal guardianship of these children and management rights to the property left by Jonathan Miller. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor. You claim to have been married to Jonathan Miller by correspondence prior to traveling west, though you have no documentation of this marriage. You further claim that these children are his by his first wife, sent to live with relatives in Massachusetts following her death, and that they arrived here just after their father's passing. Is this an accurate summary? Victoria hesitated, aware that her answer would set the tone for everything that followed. That is what I have stated previously, Your Honor. Judge Richardson's eyebrows rose slightly at her careful phrasing. Sheriff Cooper has expressed concerns about certain inconsistencies in this account. Before we proceed, I will speak privately with each child to assess their understanding of the situation. One by one, the children were called to a small antechamber to speak with the judge alone. Victoria watched them go with mounting anxiety, knowing that their future depended on what transpired in those private conversations. William went first, his shoulders squared with determination. Elizabeth followed, then the twins, each looking back at Victoria for reassurance before disappearing through the door. As they waited, Reverend Holbrook approached to sit beside Victoria. The judge is a fair man, he said quietly. He understands frontier realities, even when those realities don't align neatly with the law. Victoria asked. The Reverend smiled faintly, especially then. The law serves people, Mrs. Miller, not the other way around. At least, that's how Judge Richardson sees it. When the youngest children had taken their turns, even little Grace, clutching her rag doll for courage, the judge called for community testimony. Miss Lawrence spoke first, praising the older children's academic progress and Victoria's commitment to their education. Mrs. Peterson, who ran the general store with her husband, described how well-behaved the children were when they came to town for supplies. "They're polite and helpful," she said firmly. "Not like some young ones who run wild. It's clear they've been raised with proper values." Even Mrs. Holbrook, who had initially been so suspicious, offered supportive comments. "Mrs. Miller has integrated the family into our church community with admirable grace," she testified. "The children attend Sunday school regularly, and she has offered to assist with our school once winter chores permit." Sheriff Cooper was the only dissenting voice. "I find the timing suspicious," he stated bluntly. "Miller never mentioned having children, not once in the 5 years I've known him. Then he dies, and suddenly there are 8 of them, along with a woman claiming to be his wife. It doesn't add up." Finally, Judge Richardson called Victoria forward. "Mrs. Miller, I've heard from the community and from the children. Now I'd like to hear directly from you. Why should I grant you guardianship of these children when your connection to them is, by your own admission, tenuous at best?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Victoria took a deep breath, knowing this was the moment that would determine everything. "Your Honor, when I came west, I was seeking security and purpose. I found both, though not in the way I expected. These children needed someone to care for them, to keep them together, to give them stability after losing both parents. I needed a family to love and protect." She glanced back at the row of young faces watching her with absolute trust. "The legal facts of our situation are complicated, I acknowledge that. But the emotional truth is simple. We have become a family. Not by birth or even by marriage, but by choice and commitment." Victoria lifted her chin. "I could stand here and elaborate on the details of how we came together, but what matters most is what we've built together. A functioning farm, a loving home, a future for 8 children who deserve every chance at happiness." The judge studied her face, his expression unreadable. "And if I were to rule against you? If I determined that these children should be placed in established homes or institutions? Then we would leave," Victoria said simply. "Together, I made a promise to keep them safe and together, and I intend to honor that promise, with or without legal sanction." A murmur ran through the crowd. At this bold declaration, Sheriff Cooper frowned deeply, but Judge Richardson merely nodded, as if her answer confirmed something he had already suspected. "I'll render my decision after a brief recess," he announced, rising from his seat. "Court will reconvene in 30 minutes." The waiting was excruciating. Victoria sat with the children in the church garden, trying to prepare them for either outcome. "No matter what happens," she told them, "we'll face it together. If we need to leave, we'll find another place to build our life. But the farm is our home," Thomas protested, his 7-year-old face creased with worry. "Pa built it for us." "Home isn't just a place," Victoria said gently. "It's the people you love. Wherever we are together, that's our home." William, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke. "I told the judge the truth," he said, his voice low. "About Pay dying and us hiding in the cellar. About you finding us and promising to keep us together." Victoria's heart sank. Their carefully constructed story had crumbled, exactly as she had feared. But looking at William's steady gaze, she realized he had made the right choice. Whatever happened now would be based on truth, not deception. "You did the right thing," she assured him. "Whatever happens, we'll face it honestly." When court reconvened, the tension was palpable. Judge Richardson's expression gave nothing away as he called the hearing to order. After careful consideration of testimony from the community, private discussions with the children, and Mrs. Miller's own statements, I have reached a decision in this matter. He paused, surveying the packed room. Frontier justice must, by necessity, be adaptable to circumstances that our legal system never anticipated. This case presents exactly such circumstances. Victoria held her breath, feeling Elizabeth's hands slip into hers on one side and William's on the other. The facts, as I have determined them, are these. Jonathan Miller died of pneumonia approximately 2 months ago. His children, fearing separation, concealed themselves in the family home rather than reporting his death. Victoria Matthews arrived as his intended bride, discovered the situation, and chose to care for the children rather than abandon them to uncertain fates. The judge's accurate summary confirmed Victoria's fear. William had indeed told him everything. The murmurs from the townspeople grew louder as they processed this revelation. Sheriff Cooper's suspicions were justified, Richardson continued. The story initially presented was indeed fabricated. However, the motivation behind this deception was not criminal intent, but desperate protection of vulnerable children. He turned his gaze directly to Victoria. Mrs. Miller, or more accurately, Miss Matthews, took responsibility for 8 children who were not hers, worked to maintain their home and livelihood, and integrated them into this community, all while operating under the constant fear of discovery and separation. These are not the actions of someone seeking personal gain, but of someone driven by genuine concern for these children's welfare. Victoria hardly dared to hope as the judge continued. The children themselves have testified to her care and commitment. Their academic progress, behavior in the community, and evident well-being support the conclusion that they are thriving under her guardianship. Furthermore, multiple community members have attested to her character and capability. Judge Richardson's voice grew firmer. The law exists to protect the vulnerable and promote the common good. In this case, strict adherence to standard procedures would cause greater harm than good. Therefore, under the authority vested in me as circuit judge, I am granting Victoria Matthews temporary guardianship of all 8 Miller children for a period of 1 year. Victoria felt tears welling in her eyes as the children pressed closer to her, their own emotions barely contained. During this probationary period, the judge continued, Miss Matthews will manage the Miller property for the benefit of the children, who are Jonathan Miller's legal heirs. She will provide quarterly reports to this court regarding the children's welfare and the property's condition. After 1 year, assuming satisfactory performance of these duties, permanent guardianship will be granted. He paused, his expression softening slightly. Additionally, given the unusual circumstances and the family bonds that have clearly formed, I am authorizing a legal name change. If she so chooses, Victoria Matthews may adopt the name Miller to reflect her role as head of this family, though. This does not constitute retroactive recognition of marriage to Jonathan Miller. The judge's gavel struck with finality. This court's decision is recorded. Miss Matthews, you have undertaken an extraordinary responsibility. See that you continue to merit the trust these children and this court have placed in you. The courtroom erupted in conversation as Judge Richardson rose and departed. Victoria found herself surrounded by the children, all talking at once in a mixture of relief, excitement, and lingering anxiety. Does this mean we can stay together? Grace asked, her small face serious. Forever and ever? Yes, sweetheart. Victoria answered, gathering the little girl into her arms. We're a family now, officially recognized by the court. But everyone knows we were hiding, Elizabeth worried. That we lied about where we were when Pa died. Reverend Holbrook, who had approached to offer congratulations, overheard this concern. The truth has set you free, my dear, he said. Kindly. Now there's no need for secrets or fear. You can build your lives on honest ground. As they prepared to leave, Sheriff Cooper approached, his expression still skeptical, but less hostile than before. "You took quite a risk, Miss Matthews," he said. "Lying to a sheriff is a serious matter." "I did what I felt was necessary to protect these children," Victoria replied evenly. "I won't apologize for that, though I regret the deception." Cooper studied her for a moment, then nodded reluctantly. "Judge Richardson sees something in you worth trusting. Don't prove him wrong." With that, he turned and walked away. The journey home was vastly different from their tense drive to town that morning. The children chattered excitedly, making plans for winter projects and spring planting with a freedom they hadn't felt before. The fear that had shadowed them since their father's death had lifted, replaced by the security of legal protection and community acceptance. As they crested the final hill and the farm came into view, their farm, legally and emotionally theirs now, Victoria felt a profound sense of completion. The desperate city woman who had stepped off the train just 2 months earlier seeking security through marriage had found something far more valuable, a family created through choice rather than chance, bound by love rather than obligation. That evening, after the younger children were asleep, Victoria sat at the kitchen table with William and Elizabeth, the three of them sharing a rare moment of quiet reflection. "I've been thinking," William said hesitantly, "about what we should call you now. You've been Miss Victoria, or just Ma'am mostly, but that doesn't seem right anymore." Victoria looked at him questioningly. "What would you prefer?" The boy exchanged glances with his sister, who nodded encouragement. "We were wondering if we could call you Mother," he said finally. "Not to replace our real Ma in our memories, but because that's who you are to us now." Tears filled Victoria's eyes. "I would be honored," she whispered, "truly honored." Elizabeth reached across the table to take her hand. "Pa would have liked you," she said with the simple certainty of a child. "He wanted someone smart and kind to help raise us. That's why he put that advertisement in the paper." "I wish I could have met him," Victoria admitted. "From everything you've told me, he was a good man who loved you very much." "He'd be happy knowing we're together and safe," William stated confidently. "That's all he ever wanted for us." The winter that followed tested their resilience in new ways. Heavy snows isolated the farm for weeks at a time, forcing them to rely entirely on their own resources and ingenuity. Victoria learned to manage fuel supplies with mathematical precision. To treat minor illnesses with herbal remedies Elizabeth had learned from her mother, and to create entertainment from stories and simple games when cabin fever threatened their spirits. By spring, when Judge Richardson made his first quarterly inspection, the Miller family had not merely survived but thrived. The farm was in good order, with fields prepared for planting and livestock healthy despite the harsh winter. The children were continuing their education under Victoria's guidance, with the older ones attending the town school when weather permitted. "You've done well, Mrs. Miller," the judge commented, using the name she had legally adopted. "Better than I anticipated, if I'm being honest." "We've done well together," Victoria corrected gently, watching the children work in the newly established garden, each contributing according to their abilities. Richardson nodded thoughtfully. "I've been a judge for 30 years, Mrs. Miller, seen all manner of family arrangements, some traditional, some decidedly not. What matters isn't the legal structure, but the care and commitment." He turned to face her directly. "You've given these children something precious, stability and belonging in a world that tried to tear them apart." "They've given me just as much," Victoria replied. "Purpose, joy, a reason to push beyond what I thought were my limits." As summer turned to autumn, and autumn gave way to a second winter, the extraordinary circumstances of their coming together faded into the background of daily life. The community accepted them as the Miller family, respecting the bonds they had formed regardless of how they had begun. Victoria's teaching skills became a valued resource in the growing town. while the children's integration into school and church activities secured their place in the social fabric. On the anniversary of Jonathan Miller's death, Victoria gathered the family for a special dinner in his memory. "Your father gave you life and love," she told them as they sat around the table he had built. "He did everything in his power to keep you safe and together, even when facing his own mortality. The courage you showed in honoring his wishes brought us together." William, now 14 and growing into a thoughtful young man, raised his glass. "To Pa," he said solemnly, "who gave us life, and to Mother, who showed us how to live it." The following week, Judge Richardson returned for his final quarterly inspection before granting permanent guardianship. His evaluation was brief and decidedly positive. "I see no reason to delay formalizing your status," he informed Victoria. "The children are thriving, the property is well managed, and your integration into the community is complete." The official ceremony was simple but profound. In the same church where they had once faced scrutiny and suspicion, Victoria Matthews Miller legally became the guardian and adoptive mother of William, Elizabeth, James, Henry, Sarah, Thomas, Margaret, and Grace Miller. The entire town turned out to witness and celebrate, including Sheriff Cooper, whose initial skepticism had gradually transformed into grudging respect. "You know," he said quietly as Victoria accepted congratulations, "when you first arrived, I was certain you were running some kind of scheme. Couldn't figure out what your angle was." Victoria smiled. "My angle was 8 children who needed someone to love them. Sometimes the simplest explanation is the truth." That evening, as the family gathered on the porch to watch the sunset paint the prairie in gold and crimson, Victoria reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. She had arrived in Oakridge seeking security through marriage to a stranger, only to find her true purpose in becoming mother to his orphaned children. The deception that had begun as desperate protection had transformed into honest belonging. "What are you thinking about, Mother?" Elizabeth asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "About how life rarely gives us what we think we want." Victoria replied, "But sometimes, if we're brave enough to accept the unexpected, it gives us exactly what we need." The children nodded, understanding in their own ways the truth of her words. They had faced loss and fear, hiding and uncertainty, but had emerged stronger for the experience, bound together by choice rather than merely circumstance. As darkness fell and stars began to appear in the vast prairie sky, Victoria gazed at the family she had never expected, but now couldn't imagine living without. The mail-order bride who never married had found something far more precious than the security she had sought. She had found purpose, love, and the profound joy of belonging exactly where she was needed most. The Miller farm would continue to face challenges, harsh winters, difficult harvests, the ordinary struggles of raising 8 children to adulthood. But they would face those challenges together, a family forged in adversity and strengthened by choice, their bonds deeper and more meaningful for having been deliberately created rather than merely inherited. In the soft glow of lantern light, surrounded by the children who had become her own, Victoria silently thanked whatever fate or providence had brought her to this remote farmhouse on that autumn day. The journey had been neither easy nor straightforward, but it had led her home, to the place and the people who had been waiting for her all along. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn